The neon lights of the diner flickered faintly against the windows as the sun dipped below the horizon in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a warm Friday evening, and inside the crowded restaurant, the clatter of dishes mixed with the hum of conversation. Emily Harris, 28 years old, maneuvered swiftly between tables, balancing a full tray of orders and a smile that felt heavier than usual. Emily had worked at Tanner's Grill for nearly 3 years, a cozy yet bustling spot on the edge of downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills most of the time. Lately, though, even that seemed like a stretch. Her mother, Margaret, had been hospitalized 2 weeks ago following a stroke, and the medical expenses were piling up faster than Emily could count. Her tips, once enough to scrape by, now disappeared into prescriptions, medical equipment, and rides to the hospital. There were days Emily skipped meals, so her mother wouldn't have to. That night, she hadn't eaten since a cup of black coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was now pushing 7 in the evening. Her legs ached, her feet throbbed in the cheap sneakers she could barely afford, and her eyes burned from lack of sleep. But she kept moving, serving each table with the practiced grace of someone who had no other choice. Table 14 was seated just after 7:30. 3 young men, maybe in their early 20s, laughing loud, each with the kind of swagger that came from knowing the world had yet to teach them humility. They were the kind of customers every server recognized within seconds, the ones who demanded attention, mocked mistakes, and tipped like they were doing you a favor. Emily approached the table with her usual professional smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I get started for you?" The one in the red baseball cap, who would later reveal himself to be Liam, smiled politely. The other two were already snickering, nudging each other like schoolboys. The tall one ordered a burger, medium rare. The one with the sunglasses perched on his head asked loudly, "Are the fries here made from actual potatoes, or is it like instant powder?" Emily kept her tone even. "They're hand-cut daily. Would you like them with your burger?" "Sure, why not?" he said with a smirk. "And make sure they're hot. Not lukewarm, like last time I was here." She wrote it all down. The third man wanted a salad, but spent 5 minutes making modifications, asking if the chicken was organic and if the vinaigrette had any weird ingredients. Every question was laced with sarcasm. Every glance was a dare. Emily nodded, smiled, thanked them, and moved on. She was used to it, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. Their food came out 15 minutes later, perfectly cooked. Emily delivered it with care, refilled their drinks twice, checked in after the first few bites. Each time, she was met with dismissive waves or exaggerated compliments dripping with mockery. As they neared the end of the meal, Emily could see the fatigue setting into her limbs. A child screamed across the room. The kitchen was 2 orders behind. And then, finally, the trio stood to leave. Red Cap left the bill in the black leather folder, with what appeared to be a folded $100 bill sticking out slightly. Emily felt a moment of relief. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't as cruel as they seemed. But as the men turned to go, she heard it. "Let's see how long it takes her to figure out." They burst into laughter and walked out, their voices carrying across the room as Emily approached the table. Her heart sank as soon as her fingers touched the bill. It was fake, clearly, painfully fake. The colors were off, the texture was wrong, and across the bottom it read, "For motion picture use only." The laughter still echoed in her ears. The humiliation rose hot and sharp in her chest. For a moment, Emily stood frozen. The table was a mess. Ketchup smears on the plate, napkins torn and tossed, a fork on the floor. The fake bill rested between her fingers like a cruel joke. Her jaw clenched. She felt tears threaten to rise, but forced them back. She bent down to clean the table, gripping the plate with one hand and wiping with the other. That's when she noticed something odd. Underneath the edge of the plate, almost hidden from view, was a crumpled napkin. It had been folded and pushed partly under the dish. She picked it up absently, expecting more trash. But when she unfolded it, another piece of paper fell into her palm, a small note, folded twice, slightly wrinkled and handwritten in blue ink. The first line was scrawled hastily, but clearly. "I'm sorry for what you saw just now." Emily blinked. Her breath caught. The handwriting was different from the chicken scratch signatures on the receipt. This was neater, thoughtful. She looked toward the front doors, but the trio had already disappeared into the night. For a second, she wondered if this was part of the joke, another layer to humiliate her. But something in the way the note was folded, the tone of that opening line, it felt different. It felt human. A co-worker called her name from the kitchen. She stuffed the note into her apron pocket and grabbed the dirty plates, heart still pounding. The fake 100 lay forgotten on the table. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked away, trying to focus on the rest of her shift. But the note weighed against her side, and in the back of her mind, a single thought burned brighter than the humiliation. Who had written it and why? She wouldn't find the answer until much later that night. The restaurant quieted slightly as the dinner rush began to taper off, but Emily barely noticed. Her hands moved on instinct, stacking dishes, wiping down tables, smiling at patrons who barely looked up from their phones. The note in her apron pocket felt heavier than it should, like a stone pressing into her ribs with every breath. She hadn't read beyond the first line, but it pulsed in her mind like a question she wasn't ready to ask. Her shift wasn't over for another hour, and she couldn't risk getting caught reading personal notes during work. So she did what she always did. She pushed the emotion down deep where the customers couldn't see it. She refilled coffee mugs, swept up crumbs, and avoided looking at table 14 as if the memory of those 3 young men might still linger there, laughing at her expense. Yet, despite the ache in her feet and the emptiness in her stomach, Emily's thoughts kept circling back to the handwriting. It hadn't been rushed or cruel. It had felt like something else entirely. Regret? Maybe. But who regrets something and still goes along with it? What kind of apology gets stuffed into a napkin like a secret confession? It made no sense, but something about it refused to let her go. By the time her shift finally ended, it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. The last customers had trickled out. The kitchen lights were dimmed, and the air smelled faintly of grease and lemon-scented cleaner. Emily clocked out, grabbed her worn canvas tote bag from the staff cubby, and headed for the small break room near the back. It was barely more than a closet with a coffee machine and a cracked plastic chair, but tonight it felt like a refuge. She sat down slowly, rubbing her hands over her face before reaching into her apron pocket. The note was slightly crumpled now, warm from being against her body for hours. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases on her lap, and began to read. "I'm sorry for what you saw just now. I didn't want to be part of it, but I didn't stop it either, and I guess that makes me just as bad. You don't know me, but I saw something tonight that made me think of someone I care about. My sister works in a place like this. She's your age, maybe younger. And if I ever saw someone treat her the way we treated you, I'd lose my mind. That's the truth." Emily blinked, reading the words again slowly. There was a shakiness to them, but also something honest. She kept going. "I didn't know how to speak up. I know that sounds cowardly, and it is, but I couldn't just leave it like this. I wanted to say something, even if it's not enough. You didn't deserve that. None of it. I left something in the donation envelope behind the counter, where the staff keeps tips for shared things. It's in a small white envelope with your name on it. Please read this before you judge me completely." No signature, but the handwriting felt familiar now. It was the one who had smiled politely, the only one who hadn't openly mocked her, Red Cap Liam. Emily stared at the note, her fingers tightening around the paper. Her first instinct was disbelief. This had to be a joke, a trap, some twisted continuation of the humiliation from earlier. But something in her chest pushed back. The way the note was written, awkward but sincere, didn't match the cruelty she had endured at that table. It felt real. Hesitant, remorseful, but real. Still, she hesitated. Her pride told her throw it away, to forget it. But pride wasn't what paid for prescriptions or ambulance rides. She stood slowly, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, and made her way to the front counter. The donation envelope was a small box kept under the register, mostly used by regulars to leave small tokens or spare change for waitstaff. Nobody ever left anything significant, maybe the occasional gift card, once in a while a thank you note. Emily opened the box, her heart pounding. Tucked inside, between a few coins and a couple of folded dollars, was a plain white envelope with her name, Emily, written neatly across the front. She looked around. The restaurant was empty now. The manager had gone home, and only the dish boy was still in the back, humming to himself as he scrubbed the final pans. She peeled open the envelope carefully. Inside was a small prepaid card, the kind you buy at grocery stores, a blue Visa card. At first, she assumed it was empty, just for show, but tucked behind it was a receipt for the load amount, $200. Emily's breath caught. She looked at the card again, turning it over as if it might vanish in her hands. $200. Not a fortune. But to her, it meant a trip to the pharmacy without bargaining over what medicine her mother could afford that week. It meant gas for the car. Maybe even groceries that didn't come from the clearance aisle. She sat back down in the break room, clutching the envelope in both hands. Her emotions swirled. Anger, gratitude, confusion, disbelief. Part of her wanted to rip the card up and throw it in the trash. Why now? Why not stand up in the moment? Say something when it mattered? Why choose silence when her dignity was being chipped away in real time? But another part of her, quieter, softer, remembered how hard it was to speak out against your own friends. She'd seen it before. People staying quiet when they should have stood tall. Cowardice, yes, but not necessarily cruelty. Still, she didn't know what to do. She stared at the note again, reading it 3 more times, each word sinking in deeper. Liam, that was his name. He'd use it when ordering. She remembered now. Liam, with the red cap and the hesitant eyes. She tucked the card and the note into her bag and got up to leave. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the heavy warmth inside the restaurant. Her car sat alone in the lot, an old Toyota that coughed to life with effort. She drove home in silence, the city lights blurring as her thoughts spun. She didn't know if she forgave him. She didn't know if it was forgiveness he even deserved. But the truth sat there beside her like a passenger in the front seat. Someone had tried to undo a piece of the damage. And maybe that didn't fix everything. But it was something. The morning sun filtered through the cheap blinds of Emily's apartment, casting thin stripes of light across the kitchen table. She sat with a cup of coffee she couldn't really afford to make, the prepaid card and handwritten note lying in front of her like some unsolved puzzle. The apartment was quiet, save for the ticking wall clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Her mother, Margaret, was asleep in the adjacent room, finally resting after a restless night of pain and medication. Emily had gotten home late, and her mind hadn't stopped spinning since. She had read the note again before bed, and again when she woke up. The words hadn't changed, but her perception of them shifted with every read. It was hard to trust that the gesture had been sincere. Harder still to reconcile the cruel laughter from a night before with the kindness of $200 and a handwritten apology. But sincerity or not, the money was real. She had checked the balance. $200 exactly. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the note, the quiet acknowledgement that something wrong had happened, and that someone had seen it. Even if he hadn't spoken up at the time, Liam had spoken afterward, and in a way that few ever did. Later that afternoon, Emily stopped at the pharmacy. She handed the prepaid card to the clerk with cautious fingers, half expecting it to be declined. But the transaction went through without hesitation. For the first time in weeks, she walked out with everything her mother needed. No substitutions, no debates, no guilt. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the items in the passenger seat, overwhelmed by the quiet dignity of that moment. It was not charity. It was something else, a kind of unexpected grace. The days that followed were quiet but different. The shame of the fake tip still lingered like a bruise, but the bitterness had softened. She kept the note in her wallet, folded behind her bus pass, a reminder of the strange night that had upended her routine. Part of her had expected that to be the end of it, that Liam had done his part, left his apology, and moved on. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It was a Wednesday evening, the midweek lull that usually brought regulars and few surprises. Emily was finishing a coffee order when she looked up and saw him. He stood near the entrance, fidgeting with the bill of his red cap, eyes scanning the room. He wasn't laughing this time. There were no friends beside him, no smirks, no loud jokes. Just him, alone, looking slightly out of place and very unsure. Emily's chest tightened. She didn't move. For a moment, she thought about walking away, asking another server to handle him. But curiosity overruled instinct. She approached him slowly, wiping her hands on her apron as she drew near. "Looking for a table?" she asked, her voice even but unmistakably cautious. Liam turned toward her, visibly startled. "Emily, right?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here." She didn't answer. Her expression gave nothing away. He hesitated. "I wanted to talk. I know it's weird, and I probably shouldn't be here, but I've been thinking about the other night a lot." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You mean the part where your friends laughed in my face? Or the part where you let them?" He flinched, and Emily almost felt sorry for the honesty in her tone. "Almost. I deserve that," he said quietly. "I did. And I didn't come here to make excuses. I wanted you to know that what they did, it wasn't okay with me. I didn't stop it, and I've regretted that since the moment we left." She crossed her arms, waiting. Liam swallowed. "I wrote the note. I left the card. I know money doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo what happened. But I didn't want to pretend like it didn't matter. You mattered, and I should have acted like it." Emily studied him. He wasn't trying to charm his way out of guilt. There was no flattery, no self-pity in his voice. Just the raw discomfort of someone who knew he'd failed to do the right thing and couldn't take it back. After a long silence, she gestured toward the counter. "You here to order something, or just to clear your conscience?" That surprised a small laugh out of him. A real one this time, not the careless sound from before. "I'll take a coffee." "Black." She nodded and turned without another word, grabbing a mug and pouring from the pot behind the counter. When she brought it to him, she set it down gently and leaned in just enough for her voice to drop. "My mom's been sick," she said, not sure why she was telling him. "The card you left, it helped. A lot." Liam looked up, something like relief flashing across his face. "I'm glad. Really. I'm not saying I forgive you," she added. "But I guess I appreciate the fact that you didn't just walk away and pretend it didn't happen. I wanted to. Trust me," he said with a dry smile. "Would have been a lot easier. But you didn't." He nodded, eyes steady now. "No, I didn't." They stood there in quiet for a beat. The clatter of dishes and soft hum of conversation filled the space between them. For the first time since that night, Emily didn't feel quite so small. "Do you come here often?" she asked, immediately regretting the cliché of the question, but unable to stop herself. "Not until now," he said, offering a sheepish grin. "But maybe I will." She rolled her eyes slightly, but didn't push him away. "Just leave the fake tips at home," she muttered, half teasing, half serious. "Deal," Liam said. He sat down at the counter, sipping his coffee quietly. Emily returned to her station, but every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward him. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she didn't hate him either, and that somehow felt like a beginning. It was nearing the end of a long Thursday shift when Emily saw Liam again. It had been nearly a week since their first quiet conversation at the counter, and she hadn't truly expected him to return. Yet there he was, standing just beyond the entrance like someone unsure if he was truly welcome. The restaurant was slower than usual, the lighting softer in the early evening haze. Emily, carrying a tray of dishes from a recently cleared table, caught his eye from across the room. He raised a tentative hand in greeting. She didn't wave back, but didn't look away either. Liam stepped forward slowly, his red cap tucked in his hands instead of perched on his head. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, and his demeanor was different, more grounded, perhaps more intentional. He paused near the counter, where she was wiping down menus, waiting until she looked up. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here," he said. "I work most nights," she replied, not unkindly. He nodded and glanced around, then offered a small, tentative smile. "Would it be okay if I sat for a bit?" Emily hesitated for only a second before gesturing to the far end of the counter. "Go ahead. I'll be there in a minute." She finished wiping the menu slowly, aware of her own heart thudding with quiet tension. Part of her had hoped he wouldn't come back. It would have been easier, less complicated. But another part of her had been waiting for it, curious about whether that strange night was truly the end or only the beginning of something else. When she joined him, he had already ordered a soda from one of the other servers, the glass sweating faintly on the countertop. She sat across from him, arms folded loosely, gaze steady. "So," she said, "you came back." Liam met her eyes. "I told you I would. I didn't want our last conversation to be the last thing I said." She gave a small nod, neutral but not dismissive. "You could have just left it with a note and the card. Most people would have." "I thought about it," he admitted, "but something about that night's been stuck in my head. Not just what happened, but how it happened, what it says about me that I didn't speak up." Emily stayed silent. It wasn't her job to ease his guilt, and she wasn't about to pretend the moment hadn't scarred her. Liam took a breath. "I know you probably don't want to hear my backstory, but I keep thinking about my sister. She's 21. She just started working at a place in Atlanta, some little diner near her college. She called me a week ago crying because someone called her slow when she mixed up an order. She told me she thought she wasn't cut out for it, that she felt invisible. I hated hearing that. I told her people were jerks, that she was doing her best, and to hold her head up." He paused, eyes locking onto hers. "And then I went out with my friends, and when they started making fun of you, I said nothing. I thought about my sister the entire time, and I still said nothing." Emily didn't expect the sudden tightening in her chest. She wasn't sure why his words affected her the way they did. Maybe it was the way he didn't try to dramatize it, didn't make himself a victim in his own story. He was just laying it bare, shame, regret, and all. "You didn't have to come back," she said finally, voice quieter than she'd meant it to be. "But you did. That counts for something. I'm not sure what yet, but something." Liam nodded. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted to be here. To talk, if you'd let me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, surprised at herself, she asked, "What do you do? Outside of ruining nights for waitresses. I mean." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm in graphic design. Freelance. Which is a nicer way of saying I spend most of my time trying to convince people my work is worth paying for." That earned a real, if small, laugh from her. "Sounds familiar." They sat in silence for a while, the air between them less tense now. There was no script to follow, no clear path from humiliation to redemption. But the gap between them, once defined by bitterness, now held the fragile beginnings of something else. Mutual recognition, maybe. A strange kind of connection born from something neither of them would have chosen. Liam finished his soda and stood, placing a few bills on the counter. "I'll let you get back to work," he said. "But I meant what I said last time. I don't want to just throw money at this and walk away. I want to do better. For real." Emily didn't stop him, but she didn't brush him off either. "We'll see," she said simply. He nodded once, then turned to go. As he reached the door, she called out, "Hey, Liam." He looked back, eyebrows raised. She gestured toward the tip he'd left. "That better be real money this time." His face lit up with something close to relief. "It is. Promise." He left, the door swinging shut behind him. Emily stood there for a moment, watching the space he'd just occupied, unsure how she felt but certain that something had shifted. Not fixed, not forgotten, but changed that night. After the restaurant had closed and the last of the silverware had been rolled in napkins, Emily sat alone near the back, staring at the blank suggestion cards usually left out for customers. On a whim, she picked one up and wrote on it in black ink, "Kindness doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it's in a quiet note on a napkin or a cup of coffee shared in silence." She folded it and slipped it into her apron. Not everything needed to be dramatic. Sometimes the small things were the ones that stayed. The change began softly, like dawn breaking after the longest night. Emily arrived for her shift one Monday morning, bleary-eyed and weary from sleepless nights spent worrying over her mother's recovery. The restaurant's regular buzz greeted her. A few casual good mornings, the clang of dishes, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with lemon-scented cleaner. But today, something beneath the surface felt different. As she moved through her routine, pouring drinks, clearing tables, offering menus, She carried with her a quiet anticipation, as if the tension of the past weeks had finally shifted. Before her first table sat down, she noticed a small stack of printed index cards near the counter. Suggestion cards with blank lines below. She recognized the one with her own cryptic note tucked inside from the night before, its words still lingering in the soft morning light. Another card had been placed beside it. Leave a note. Start something. Emily folded the card slowly, her mind traveling back to that first moment of humiliation, followed by that tiny act of compassion that changed everything. She folded it again and slipped it into her apron pocket, resolved not to let the moment pass unnoticed. That evening, as the dinner rush wound down, the campaign quietly began. It started with one customer, an older man who had watched Emily carry a heavy stack of plates with gentle strength. When he got his check, he paused, scribbled something on the card, and left it with a generous tip. Emily barely saw him, but the words on the card caught her breath there at the counter. Thank you, not just for food, but for treating everyone with respect. You deserve better than what people can sometimes give. She read that during her break, fingertips trembling, and realized something powerful. The idea she'd planted the night before was taking root. Others followed gradually. A mother with 2 small children left a cartoon sketch on one card, just a careful drawing of flower and the words, "You're a hero to my kids, because you're kind when life is hard." A local businessman left a note alongside $30 in the envelope, encouraging her to use it for something that mattered to her. Without judgment, just care. Among the growing collection, there was one card that stood out. It bore neat handwriting, each letter carefully placed as though the writer had paused between every word, measuring the weight of what they were writing. The words, familiar now, made her heart flutter. Thank you for reading my note. I'm glad you came back. We're not invisible. She held it for a moment, the paper cool and fragile in her hands. No signature, no declaration, just that sentence, heavy with meaning. She looked toward the entrance, half expecting to see him standing there. But he wasn't. Maybe he had left on another shift, or maybe he'd stayed back to watch the moment unfold. In the following days, the Kindness Anonymous campaign grew steadily. Regular customers started joining in, leaving notes and small tokens, flowers, coffee gift cards, drawings, a poem. The staff began collecting them in a small box near the break room, sharing them quietly when shift changed. The campaign had a life of its own now, woven into the fabric of the restaurant. Emily found herself changed too. She handled rude tables with less weariness in her voice, ready to extend grace even when she didn't feel like it. She knew better now. Small kindnesses could echo far beyond their origin, rippling out in unexpected ways. One late afternoon, Liam walked in again. This time he carried a plain notebook with a hardcover and no title on the front. He approached her quietly, placing the notebook into her hands. Inside, underneath a blank front page, there was another card taped in. For all the hearts you've touched, keep writing kindness. Emily looked up, words stalling in her throat. Liam's expression was open, no expectation, only sincerity. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Later, that night, after the restaurant was clean and quiet, Emily sat at the small table near the back, turning the notebook over in her lap. She lifted the flap inside the cover and saw the first page already written, a simple message in neat pen. This is for anyone who needs to say something kind, to write, to share, to give a moment's hope. Please add your words. She opened to the next blank page and placed the pen in her hand, heart pliant. She began, I once thought kindness had to be grand to matter, but even a whisper, a note folded in an apron, can change everything. When she closed the notebook and slipped it back into her bag, its weight felt different, lighter, alive. The campaign had become more than a gesture of resistance against cruelty. It was a living reminder of community, resilience, and possibility. As Emily turned off the diner's lights that night and stepped out into the soft glow of the parking lot, she breathed deeply. The road ahead was still uncertain, her mother's health, her finances, but she wasn't walking alone. Not anymore. Someone had given her a chance to choose compassion, even after being hurt. And in that choice, She had found hope and opened a small door for others to do the same.